Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Elder Scrolls Iceberg. Today, we'll be exploring some of the iceberg's darkest depths. Daylight is far behind us now, and the only way out is to descend even further. Before the end, we'll come face to face with the deepest, most mind-bending secrets of the Aurbis. This episode will make you question everything you think you know about the Elder Scrolls universe. Are the gods real or imaginary? What really happened to Talos? What does it mean for something to be canon? And what does Vivec really have going on down there? No worries if you haven't seen the earlier videos, you can jump right in here. But if you want to watch the whole series from the beginning, you can find a link to the Iceberg playlist on the screen or in the description. And before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. Now settle in and calm your mind, for you're about to hear some of the most obscure, bizarre, and downright disturbing secrets of the Elder Scrolls cosmos. 399. Hasfat and Tabalis. If you've played Morrowind, you probably remember Hasfat. After you report to Caius in Balmora, his first quest will send you to the Fighters Guild to speak with an Imperial informant named Hasfat and Tabalis. He will agree to trade information if you retrieve a Dwemer puzzle box for him from a nearby ruin. This may induce traumatic memories for many Morrowind players, particularly of dying to this guy on the bridge because you made a terrible build that can't even land a hit. But anyway, Hasfat is kind of a weird guy. He claims to be an expert on Morrowind's history, with an interest in the Dwemer, but to be honest, his knowledge seems pretty surface level. Interestingly, he has a materialist interpretation of history, claiming that the destinies of individuals are created by historical processes. This is a common view among real-world historians, but a slightly strange take in a world filled with literal gods and prophecies. Out of game, Hasfat also featured in Bethesda forum roleplays as a character written by Kuhlmann, appearing alongside characters such as Yagrum Bagan and Vivec. The nature of these discussions, which often include profound metaphysical ideas, seems to imply that Hasfat really was one of the leading scholars of his age. 400. Elf sightings. In Morrowind, if you walk past the Nord, you might be greeted by this voice line.
Seen any elves?
Now, this is a rather strange thing to say in a province that is primarily populated by dark elves. It's probably just an attempt at humour, but it could also be attributed to the famous stereotype that Nords are somewhat dim-witted. Morrowind leans into this stereotype a bit, often for comedic effect, as we saw when we discussed the surprising number of Nords who end up naked with their clothes stolen. So it's possible that some Nords who travelled to Morrowind just didn't consider the possibility that the land that is famously the home of the Dark Elves might actually be full of elves. 401. Sea Gods. Across Tamriel's pantheons, there is a lack of a clear god of the sea, something that's present in basically every real-world mythology. Michael Kirkbride has since admitted that he forgot to include one when sketching out the original mythologies. Still, a few deities have picked up marine associations over the years. Hermaeus Mora is probably the closest thing to a sea god, with his abyssal imagery, while others point to Orgnum, the immortal king of the Maeamer. A deity named Vigrill, god of the sea, was present in an early Daggerfall build, though never made it to the final game. ESO's Elsewhere expansion included another candidate in Zisa, a Sayesi goddess tied to the oceans and waters. But the absence of a definitive sea god remains one of those odd quirks in Elder Scrolls cosmology. 402. The Last War. Nordic myth speaks of an apocalyptic conflict known as the Last War, which conjures up images of Ragnarok in real-world Norse mythology. But the phrase is something of a paradox, because the Last War is also the first. This refers to the Great War of the Elnafe during the Dawn Era, a conflict that shaped the world itself. In Nordic belief, the warriors of Sovngarde spend eternity preparing for the final battle of this war, training for the day that Alduin returns to devour the world. For the Nords, the Last War is both the beginning and the end, the eternal cycle of conflict at the heart of creation. 403. Continent pushing. This strange out-of-game concept comes from a sketch by Michael Kirkbride, showing Ysgramor using the Thu'um to literally push the continents of Atmora closer to Tamriel, so that the journey back is never so long again. Whether this was meant as a metaphor for the Atmoran migrations, or an actual mythic act of world-shaping remains unclear. It could also be read as an in-universe explanation of the theory of continental drift. But in the world of the Elder Scrolls, where voices can topple cities and reshape mountains, the idea of a hero shifting continents with a shout doesn't feel completely outlandish. 404. Gods are imaginary. This links back to the idea of mythopoeia that we discussed earlier in the series. Some have expanded on the concept to argue that the gods are not eternal independent beings, but rather projections of mortal belief. As the theory goes, divinity is a function of worship. Gods gain power because mortals give it to them, and without worshippers, they would cease to exist altogether. This is supported by some dialogue in Morrowind, where Vivec seems to imply it was necessary for the people of Morrowind to continue worshipping the tribunal so the living gods could sustain their remaining power. While it is a fascinating idea, I think it's safe to say that it's been effectively disproven. Modern lore heavily implies that the Etarda were the primordial spirits, and because they existed before mortals, they cannot have been dependent on their worship as the source of their power. 405. Arena Telecon. Arena Telecon is a term originating in the text New Hatter of the Sphinx Moth Inquiry Tree. In it, the moth priest New Hatter uses the word to describe Vivec. In a forum post, Michael Kirkbride explained it means a creature that alternates between male and female, a fitting descriptor for Vivec, who has been shown to change between genders. This blurring of gender is a recurring theme in the lore surrounding Vivec. While Sothasil represents the male, and Almalexia the female, Vivec represents everything in between. Like Sothasil says, Vivec craves radical freedom, the death of all limits and restrictions. He wishes to be all things at all times. Every race, every gender, every hero, both divine and finite. But in the end, he can only be Vivec. 406. The Calling. The Calling was a form of telepathic communication used by the Dwemer. Special headgear known as Dwemer mitres amplified this thought projection, allowing the dwarves to share ideas or summon one another across great distances. According to some accounts, Kagranak used the Calling during the Battle of Red Mountain to rally all the Dwemer to his side, right before their disappearance. Most famously, one of these items is worn by Dagoth Ur as a golden mask, suggesting he may have repurposed their design to call to his followers and transmit his mad dreams to haunt the people of Morrowind. 407. Chimeri Quae. The Chimeri Quae appear in the Unfinished Pocket Guide to the Empire, 2nd edition. They are described as a remnant of the Chimer people inhabiting Cafnaquae, an archipelago in the Padamaic Ocean between Tamriel and Akavir. The Chimeri Quae are said to dwell on enormous mobile flotillas that dock to trade with their neighbours. It's possible that they are remnants of Chimer who somehow escaped Azura's curse and remained untransformed into Dunmer. Like much of the Pocket Guide 2nd edition, their canonicity is questionable, but the idea of uncursed Chimer surviving outside of Morrowind is an idea with some interesting implications. 408. Everything said about Talos is true. There are a lot of theories surrounding Talos, especially how he ascended to godhood. We've discussed a few of these already, such as the Arcturian heresy and the Enantiomorph. But this entry suggests that somehow these contradictory accounts may all be true at the same time. And if you've been paying attention, you might have already guessed the justification for this. 2 words. Dragonbreak. When Tiber Septim used the Mantella to activate the new medium, it almost certainly caused a Dragonbreak. As we've discussed, the Siege of Alinor was said to last only an hour, but there were still Altmer mages locked in a battle across time, still fighting the construct. This kind of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nonsense simply screams Dragonbreak. And if a dragon break really took place, then all of the contradictory events surrounding Talos could have occurred in overlapping timelines, thus explaining the apparent inconsistencies in the accounts of his life and ascent to godhood. 409. Tigers equal dragons. In the languages of the Elder Scrolls, the word Tosh has various meanings. In the ancient Nedic tongue, it means dragon, as in Akatosh, the dragon god of time. The book Mysterious Akavir describes a figure called Tosh Rakar, the tiger-dragon ruler of the Capo Tun. So it's possible that in their language, Tosh means either tiger, dragon, or both. This links back to entry 391, when we discussed the possibility that there are no true tigers in Tamriel. But perhaps we can push this idea one step further to claim that in the world of the Elder Scrolls, tigers and dragons are the same thing. Mysterious Akavir seems to support this, claiming that the Capo Tun tried to become dragons, and that Tosh Rakar was the first to succeed, becoming the largest dragon in all the known world. 410. Everything Vivec says is a lie. Vivec is a character with many faults, and one of them is his difficult relationship with the truth. He seems to lie about almost everything at some point. If you think about it, the entire tribunal temple is built on a lie, and was propped up by lies for thousands of years until it all came crumbling down. He basically admits to this in a coded message in the 36 lessons. He was not born a god. His destiny did not lead him to this crime. He chose this path of his own free will. He stole the godhood and murdered the Hortator. Vivec wrote this. Though considering Vivec's history of deception, we have to consider whether this is yet another misdirection. Still, I think it's too simple to dismiss Vivec as a simple liar. Once again, Sothasil puts it best. Vivec knows the boundaries that separate fact from fiction. He knows them so well that he's learned how to break them. He exists inside his verse, but recognizes the lies, the contradictions. He both does, and does not, believe his own tales. 411. Reman heard Pelennor. In the Song of Pelennor, the Star-Made Knight seems to have some kind of premonition about the birth of Reman Cyrodiil. Pelennor called out Haramir of Copper and Tian to a duel at the Tor, and ate his neck veins while screaming praise to Reman, a name that no one knew yet. Michael Kirkbride expands on this idea in the out-of-game text. What would Pelennor do? This essentially involves Reman hearing Pellennor's roar across time, and using weird Moth Priest time magic to try and communicate with him. So it's about as normal as you'd expect from a Kirkbride text about Reman. 412. The Tribunal never actually existed. A couple of in-universe sources, such as the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 1st edition, speak of Morrowind as if the Tribunal were merely a cultural myth rather than literal living gods. It reads, to an outsider, the priesthood of the Tribunal seems to be the true power in Morrowind. These tribunes, if they ever existed, have not been seen in centuries. Now obviously this is wrong, as we meet literally all the members of the Tribunal in-game, but there are a couple of explanations for this discrepancy. Out of game, it's probably just a case of the lore evolving, as these sources were written before the release of Morrowind, and the developers hadn't fully mapped out the lore of the province yet. But in-universe, it could be explained away as imperial propaganda designed to undermine the belief in Morrowind's living gods. 413. Orc breasts. This refers to Michael Kirkbride's early concept art for Morrowind, which depicted orcs with 6 nipples. Don't worry, I'll spare you the visuals. This detail was ultimately cut before the final release, leaving the in-game orcs with more conventional humanoid anatomy. According to Kirkbride's forum posts, this was inspired by the in-universe description of the orcs as the pig children, and so the addition of extra nipples was intended to make them more closely resemble pigs in appearance. This idea was ultimately left on the cutting room floor, but it's only a matter of time before it gets revived by some thirsty modder, if that hasn't happened already. 414. The New Man. The term New Man refers to the individual who achieves Amaranth, the final state of transcendence in the Elder Scrolls metaphysics, in which one becomes the new Godhead and creates their own reality. The phrase originates from one of the 6 walking ways described in the 36 Lessons of Vivec, the scarab that transforms into the new man. In this context, the scarab represents mortality, and the new man is the being who breaks free from the cycle of creation and dreams a new universe. To put it briefly, the new man is not just enlightened, they are the next dreamer of the cosmos. 415. Reman R-word baby. So I need to be a bit careful with phrasing on this one, in case YouTube decides to censor it. But anyway, the traditional mythic origin story of Reman claims he was born after the warlord Hroll made love to a mountain containing the spirit of Saint Alessia. But there's also a much darker historical account. Writing his Hasfat Antabolis, Kuhlmann claimed that Hroll was well known in his appetites for young girls, and that Reman was born after Hroll forced himself on the shepherdess said Yenna. According to this account, the legend about the hill was fabricated to mythologize Reman's origins after his rise to power. This version of events is troubling for another reason, as said Yenna would go on to become the wife of Reman, implying that the emperor married his own mother. Ultimately, like so much surrounding the life of Reman, it's impossible to tell where history ends and legend begins. 416. Reachman Anarcho-Primitivism. This idea compares the Reachman's tribal, nature-centered lifestyle to modern anarcho-primitivism, an ideology which advocates deindustrialization and technological regression. Think, reject humanity, return to monkey. Anyway, while Skyrim initially portrayed the Reachman as primitive and chaotic, which would fit more with this ideology, ESO reveals a far more organized and functioning society, complete with laws, religion, and trade. They even have a ruler called a despot, so their society is hardly a model of anarchism. In fact, during the time of the Reachman's self-rule, the region was relatively stable and prosperous, so it seems the comparison is less about ideology and more about aesthetics. 417. Turd helmets. This comes from early Morrowind concept art by Michael Kirkbride, depicting Imperial helmets designed for use in Morrowind. There's a wide variety of designs, but the one that sticks out the most is labelled Nordic Fur and Turd Helmet. Though some elements of these helmet designs made it into the game, such as the visor helm being adapted for Redoran armour, it seems the more unconventional designs were left on the cutting room floor. Still, perhaps one vestige of the turd helmet remains in-game, namely, in the form of the infamous Colovian fur helm, which, if you squint hard enough, just about resembles the shape of a turd. 418. Dregs equal dragons. In Mankar Cameron's commentaries, the Dreg of the previous Kalpa are described as immortal beings akin to the time totems of old, a title typically reserved for dragons, who are aspects of the time god Akka. By contrast, the Dreg of the current era appear as almost mindless creatures, little more than sea monsters. This has led to the theory that Dreg were once dragon-like time aspects, but somehow lost their power after the turning of the Kalpa, becoming the strange crustacean folk who stalk the seas of Tamriel today. 419. Coders. I've already mentioned Michael Kirkbride's Coda project a few times, but we haven't really discussed if it's canon. And there isn't exactly a simple answer to this. Obviously, Kirkbride left Bethesda after Morrowind, and as he's no longer a developer, surely his work isn't canon. Seems simple enough, right? But I think the whole point of Coda is that there is no such thing as canon. We are each the player in our own game, the author of our own story, and we all have our own interpretation of the messy, wonderful world of the Elder Scrolls. Taken this way, we can imagine the Elder Scrolls as a sort of open source mythology, and any story, as long as it resonates with you, can be a part of your own personal canon. By merely taking part in this mythos, we are writing our own coda, and what's written in that coda is up to you, and you alone. 420. Alessia created dragons. In the Remanada, Alessia is called the Mother of Dragons. No, not that one. And described as the wife of Auriel, the elven aspect of the time god Akatosh. Whether this title is symbolic or literal remains ambiguous. Since dragons refer to Akatosh as their father, this has led to speculation that Alessia literally gave birth to the dragons, or at least oversaw their creation in the current Kalpa. I think it's unlikely to be the literal truth, as Alessia was born in the early First Era, and we have records of dragons existing as far back as the Merethic Era. But considering the weird nature of draconic time magic, I suppose anything's possible. 421. Chair Stacking. Furniture Speaks. This refers to a strange site in the 6th house stronghold of Coggaroon, which we visit during the Morrowind main quest. In the fortress, you will find chairs and tables stacked upon one another, creating strange constructions. The 6th house's ash slaves can shed some light on this curious phenomenon. If you manage to calm one with a spell, you will be greeted with some unique dialogue. The chairs, the tables, all confused. We hear the words and must speak them. We take them and arrange them, but still, they will not be quiet. But what could this mean? Well, the Ash Slaves are still in the early stages of Dagoth-Ur's indoctrination. What we are seeing could be their minds slipping away, as their consciousness is overwhelmed by the whispers of the false dreamer, until they can no longer tell dream from reality. That is, if such a distinction even exists at all. 422. Thalmor worship Aldmeris. This refers to the possibility that the Thalmor do not worship the gods in the traditional sense. Instead, they revere the idea of Aldmeris, the ancestral, pre-divided state of elven kind. To them, Aldmeris is not merely a lost homeland, but the perfect spiritual condition before the elves were bound to mortality. In this sense, the Thalmor's political agenda is inherently religious. They seek to unmake the mortal world and return all Mer to Aldmeris, whether that means a literal place or a metaphysical state of divinity. It's certainly an intriguing idea, and would provide an interesting explanation for the zealotry of the Thalmor in the current era. 423. Dreg are elves. In Sermon 28 of the 36 lessons, Vivec calls the Dreg the Altma of the Sea. This has led to speculation that Dreg may have once been elves, or that they are a related offshoot that adapted into aquatic life forms. The obscure Republic of Hard text also refers to the Dreg as Cephalomer, implying a connection between the Dreg and the elves. Whether literal or metaphorical, the idea suggests that Dreg could be the remnants of an ancient Merish race that took to the oceans in a previous Kalpa, only to eventually degenerate into the monstrous forms they possess in the current era. 424. Almalexia fucked everyone except Nerevar. Almalexia, the living goddess of the Dunmer, was once the wife of Indoral Nerevar, who was Morrowind's greatest hero before his untimely murder. But according to this theory, she wasn't the most faithful spouse. It's possible that her marriage to Nerevar was purely political, bringing together a queen of the Velothi and their war leader, the Hortator. So it's possible that Almalexia's true desires lay elsewhere. We know that at some point, Almalexia and Vivec were lovers, and considering Vivec's history, this is easy to believe. But could it be possible that Almalexia was also Sothasil's lover? Or perhaps even Vorin Dagoth's? Though this would add a new dimension to the relationship between the living gods, it's impossible for us to know either way. But maybe getting the 6th house to stack furniture is Dagoth-Ur's way of reminding Nerevar that he belongs in the cuck chair. 425. Quantum Akka spirits. This theory suggests that the god Akatosh, also known as Akka, Alkosh, Uriel, and a dozen other names, is not a single fixed entity, but a quantum spirit whose identity changes based on cultural perception. In this view, all the time dragons of every pantheon are simply observations of the same underlying being in different states. In quantum physics, there is a phenomenon called the observer effect. Basically, this means that the act of observing a particle can actually change its behaviour. Perhaps we can also apply this observer effect to the time god himself. It would explain why Akatosh seems contradictory, fractured, or even insane. The act of mortals believing in him in different ways causes him to take on different forms. 426. Tomorrowwind. Alright, so this is a weird one. In Michael Kirkbride's Coda, Morrowind is reimagined in a far future cyberpunk setting known as Tomorrowwind. People have television sets instead of heads, and the Tribunal are a superhero team called the Pseudo-Sixth House, whose nemesis is Yagrum Bagan, reimagined as a supervillain called the Intellective. I did tell you it was weird. But Tomorrowwind is less a literal future and more of a metaphor, a story within a story. The idea is that the Elder Scrolls universe is not locked in stasis, and that the stories of Morrowind can be told again and again in new forms, even in the far future. 427. Second Pocket Guide to the Empire. I've used this as a source a few times already, but it's worth digging a little deeper. The first edition of the Pocket Guide was a physical manual included in copies of the Elder Scrolls Redguard. The third edition was similarly included in the collector's edition of Oblivion, but the second edition was skipped over and never officially released by Bethesda. So a fan project led by Michael Kirkbride set out to create an unofficial second edition. It was intended to serve as an in-universe pocket guide commissioned by Queen Kintyra, but never published due to being deemed heretical by the Empire, thus explaining its absence from canon and the direct jump to the third edition. The text famously explores some of the most esoteric corners of Elder Scrolls lore, including lunar colonies and megalomoth spaceships. Though it's not an official source, its existence is referenced in the preamble to the third edition, so it arguably has a place in canon despite its out-of-game origins. 428. Numinatus PhD. This is a reference to Professor Numinatus, a character jointly created by Michael Kirkbride and LadyNerevar. The title character is essentially Tamriel's version of Doctor Who, travelling through metaphysical planes in a surreal parody of Elder Scrolls cosmology. It was intended to be a comic book, and though it was never completed, you can find an outline of its script on the UESP wiki. I'll include a link in the description if you want to take a look. It's a fun read, if you're interested in that sort of thing. 429. Jagar Tharn is Sayesi. There has always been debate about the true nature of Jagar Tharn, the traitorous imperial battle mage who usurped the Ruby Throne during the events of Arena. In the real Baronzaya, he's described as a mongrel elf with snake-like eyes, a detail that has fueled speculation that Tharn may have been a Sayesi in disguise. His attempt to usurp the imperial throne could have been a misguided effort to restore Akaviri control over Tamriel. This theory is often linked to the notion that Tharn was a vampire, since the Sayesi are frequently associated with vampirism and serpentine traits. While no definitive source confirms this, the idea persists as a compelling origin for one of the Elder Scrolls' most iconic villains. 430. The Right Reaching. This is a cryptic phrase which first appears in Sermon 21 of Vivec's 36 Lessons, also known as the Scripture of the Wheel. It reads, "Look at the majesty sideways, and all you see is the tower, which our ancestors made idols from. Look at its centre, and all you see is the begotten whole, second serpent, womb ready for the right reaching, exact and without enchantment." The phrase also appears in a couple of other esoteric texts, namely The Illusion of Death and On the Detachment of the Sheath. Like many things involving Vivec, it's open to interpretation, but I read it as the act of reaching outside the Aurbis, escaping the cycle of life, death, and even time itself. This is supported by the Illusion of Death, which reads, "Then did Maruk know a right reaching, that one devoted to proper life and elnific annulments shall persist beyond the illusion of death." However, both texts ultimately fall short of explaining how such transcendence may be achieved. 431. Orgnum destroyed Aldmeris. Orgnum, the immortal sorcerer king of the Mayama, is said to have once been an Aldmeri noble who rebelled and was exiled to the island of Pyandanir. He has since waged war against the Altmer for millennia. This theory digs a little deeper and claims that Orgnum was responsible for the destruction of Aldmeris, the mythical homeland of the elves. However, there isn't any textual evidence to support this. As we have seen, Almeris may not have even been a real place in the physical sense, but rather a spiritual ideal or memory. The theory is likely speculation born from Orgnum's hatred of the Ultima, rather than any canonical connection to Almeris' disappearance. 432. Giant Swirls. According to the 7 fights of the Aldudaga, giants have a particular fondness for bright colours and swirling patterns. Early Nords supposedly discovered that if they painted offerings with large colourful swirls and left them out in the open, the giants would peacefully take the offerings and leave everyone else alone. Though the 7 fights is an out-of-game source, Skyrim would go on to reflect this in-game. The painted cows seen in giant camps are marked with swirling symbols, perhaps implying that they were offerings from local Nords meant to appease their giant neighbours. 433. Sky Lamps. Sky lamps were a piece of cut content from Morrowind, a strange, floating species that once filled the skies of the Dark Elf homeland. In the Skeleton Man's interview, it's mentioned that these sky lamps were the reason that dragons abandoned Morrowind entirely. Though never implemented in the final game, their concepts evolved into creatures like cliff races and netches. A little bit of concept art remains, as well as a few references in pre-release lore for Morrowind. But only one remnant of these creatures seems to have survived in-game. The spell Sky Lamp's Shadow, which fortifies the user's speed for a short time. 434. Almalexia Underking Connection. This appears to be a reference to Mysterious Akavir and its description of the second Akaviri invasion. It reads, "Once, Adasum Dir Kamal, a king among demons, attempted to conquer Morrowind, but Almalexia and the Underking destroyed him at Red Mountain." The Arcturian heresy similarly claims that Almalexia summoned the Underking in the form of Izmir Wolfhearth to repel the Akaviri invasion. This seems to imply there is some hidden connection between Almalexia and Izmir. Why else would one of Morrowind's greatest enemies come to their aid? However, it seems likely that this is just a case of outdated lore. ESO confirmed that Wolfhearth really did return to fight the Akaviri, but that he was summoned by the Nords, not Almalexia. It's possible that at one point, the writers were laying the groundwork for an Almalexia Underking connection, but if this idea once existed, it has long since been abandoned. 435. Kierjo. Kierjo Chorvak is one of those characters who seems to blur the line between in-game and out-of-game. In Daggerfall, the author of the book The Wild Elves is named as Kiergo Chorvak, but by Morrowind, the same book is credited to Kierjo Chorvak, now described as a Khajiiti scholar. Meanwhile, the Pocket Guide to the Empire lists Kiergo as a Khajiiti ruler from the Second Era. Coincidentally, Kierjo's surname, Chorvak, sounds very similar to that of Severian Chorak, a Sayesi ruler of the Akaviri Potentate. To make things even more complicated, one of the Morrowind developers used Kierjo as their forum roleplay persona, though it's not exactly certain who. The character is even referenced in-game by the Mad Telvanni mistress Thorana. So is Kierjo a scholar, a king, a Sayesi, or a developer's avatar bleeding into canon? The answer is probably all of them at once. 436. Amaranth, Anon, Anu. This refers to a thread on the old Elder Scrolls forums called Summing Up the Amaranth, which contains extensive discussion on, you guessed it, the true nature of the Amaranth. In this thread, Michael Kirkbride wrote, Amaranth Anon Anu AI, which is said to have occupied the passageways of heaven and earth, because everyone above and below asks Amaranth Anon Anu AI if they cannot find the passage. Amaranth Anon Anu AI is the Godhead who caused to be visible. Now you might be thinking, what in Oblivion does that mean? Well, Kirkbride is referencing Anuiel, the embodiment of order and the diametric opposite of Sithis, who personifies chaos. He seems to be saying that Anuiel is a being that has achieved Amaranth, mantling the original Godhead to become the new dreamer at the heart of the universe. The secret was hidden in his name all along. Anu. 437. Kime by Skooma. In many cultures across history, mind-altering substances have often been linked to states of enlightenment. So why shouldn't the same be true in Tamriel? We know that for the Khajiit, moon sugar isn't just a narcotic, it also serves a religious function. So could it be possible to get high enough that you achieve true transcendence and see through to the heart of the dream? I suppose it's possible, but remember, if you're ever at a party and someone comes up to you babbling about how we're all part of a dream inside a dead god's mind, it's probably best that you don't have whatever they're having. 438. Why R founded the 4th era Thalmor? If you made it this far, you probably know all about the Thalmor already. But you're probably thinking, who the hell is YR? Well, if you read the Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition, you will see some annotations left by an elf known only by the initials YR. He describes the Septim regime as lunacy and rails against human trespass, and generally comes off as a bit of an elven supremacist. This would match up with the ideology of the Thalmor in the 4th era, and a high elven lifespan would mean that YR could still be around by the time of its rise to power. But to be honest, I think it's a bit of a stretch, and we don't have any real evidence to connect the two. 439. Vivec killed Tiber Septim. According to Imperial theology, Tiber Septim died at the age of 108 after reigning as Emperor of Tamriel for more than 30 years. But in an interview with Vivec, the warrior poet claims to have been the cause of Tiber Septim's death. Vivec seems to imply that gifting Tiber Septim the Numidium as part of the armistice ultimately resulted in the Emperor's demise. But what does he mean by this exactly? Well, we have previously discussed that the god Talos could be a fusion of several souls, including that of Tiber Septim and his imperial battle mage, Zurin Arctus. It's possible that Vivec means that the Numidium was the catalyst for this apotheosis. To birth Talos the god, Tiber Septim the man had to die. Of course, Vivec has a strained relationship with the truth, and he often speaks metaphorically, so this shouldn't only be taken with a grain of salt, but with the whole shaker. 440. Arius. When creating your character in Arena and Daggerfall, you can fill out a questionnaire to help you generate a class. One of the questions involves a story about a primitive island where a young child was sacrificed every year to appease Arius, the god of fire. If the islanders failed to offer a sacrifice, the volcano would erupt, causing devastation. It's not clear whether this is a real god in the Elder Scrolls universe, or simply a deity made up for a hypothetical question. Regardless, the fire god Arius has never appeared again, and the idea has presumably been abandoned. Still, in Oblivion, there is a Lake Arius, and though the spelling is slightly different, it coincidentally contains a shrine to Mehrunes Dagon, a vengeful deity also associated with fire. 441. The Parliament of Craters. So this is yet another reference to the 36 Lessons of Vivec. If you want to turn this video into a drinking game, just throw back a shot every time they come up. Actually, don't do that. I don't think any amount of restoration magic could save you. Anyhow, the Parliament of Craters is mentioned in Sermon 16. After a conversation between Nerevar and Vivec, where Vivec states that the path to heaven is through violence, Nerevar retreats to the moon of Massa to contemplate these words. Then, Nerevar was greeted by the Parliament of Craters, who knew him by title and resented his presence, for he was to be a ruling king of Earth, and this was the lunar realm. The nature of these craters is mysterious. They claim to be the graves of those who have migrated and become ancient countries, and it's possible that they represent a sort of sentient lunar landscape. After a battle with Nerevar, only a few of the craters remain, and they scold the Hortator, implying that his victory was a hollow one. You fall below the weight of destiny. You have only dug more and supplied no ghosts to reside within. 442. Lost Twill. Lost Twill is a place mentioned in the Remanada as the home place of the warlord Hroll, the man who would become Reman's father. In the Elder Scrolls Online, it's also mentioned that there was a Duke of Twill during the First Empire. It's most likely that Twill was an ancient city in Cyrodiil that was destroyed or abandoned some time before Reman's birth. but there's also a stranger possibility. In an interview with LadyNerevar, Michael Kirkbride is on record as saying that Reman was fathered by spacemen, knights from beyond Twill. In the same interview, Kirkbride claims that Twill is derived from the word twilight and is always found in the west. So it's possible that Twill was not on Tamriel at all, but far out in the sea or even in the reaches of space, and that its location was gradually forgotten over the centuries. 443. Thalmor Time Control. In Skyrim, a Thalmor agent found at the ruins of Thorolhost carries orders to return a recovered Dragon Priest mask to Labyrinthian. If all the Dragon Priest masks are gathered together at the Sanctuary in Labyrinthian, it allows one to travel back in time to the Dragon Cult era. This has led to the theory that the Thalmor were attempting to manipulate time, possibly to retrieve Konarik, the most powerful Dragon Priest mask, or perhaps in an effort to change history. We've already discussed how the Eye of Magnus may have had some relation to time travel, so the Thalmor's interest in that artifact only adds more fuel to this theory. This interest in time magic may be part of the Thalmor's potential plan to unmake the mortal world and restore their elves' long-lost immortality. 444. The Striking. Exact Egg Cracking. Known in the Argonian language as Ixtath Tithil Met, or this. The exact egg cracking refers to the Argonian understanding of Sithis. In Argonian culture, Sithis is not viewed as a force of chaos, but of change. This is why modern Argonians choose to live in wooden huts among the reeds. It's not ignorance, but a conscious choice. They believe that everything is temporary, and so building stone cities and castles is a folly against the natural order. If you swim against the tide, you will surely drown. Better to allow yourself to flow with it. For the Argonians, Sithis is not a god to be worshipped or feared, but the act of transformation itself, the shattering that makes reality possible. 445. Wilderland. This is an old name for Cyrodiil, seen in the old Daggerfall book King Edward. The character Morrilan describes it thus: "It seems a pleasant land, but no king's writ runs here. Each man's hand is against every other's, and there are worse than men. All the races of Tamriel meet here, and clash." The book takes place during the First Era, so the name Wilderland implies that Cyrodiil was a dangerous and untamed frontier during this time. It could also be a reference to the jungles of Cyrodiil. When Daggerfall was released, Cyrodiil was still imagined as a tropical province, and its climate would not be retconned until later. 446. Sentient Thras. This is a theory concerning Thras, the coral kingdom of the slowed slugmen. In a 2014 Tumblr post, a user under the name of That Dead Cactus account asked Michael Kirkbride where the idea of the slowed came from. Kirkbride responded that their appearance was a nod to Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars, and that Ken Ralston was inspired by the idea of sentient coral reefs for their homeland. The idea that the coral kingdom of the slowed is actually a sentient being is pretty interesting, and I think it fits the lore quite well. We know that the number of islands in Thras seems to fluctuate, and have been known to rise and sink beneath the waves. The book, The Doors of Oblivion, describes the slowed making human sacrifices to spires of coral. It could be possible that they are doing this to appease some kind of powerful sentience which inhabits the reefs of Thras, one that even the slowed fear. 447. Sermon 0. This entry refers to an out-of-game text called Sermon 0 of the 36 and 9 Sermons of Vivec. It was written by Bethesda developer Douglas Goodall, and in places, it appears to contradict the original 36 lessons. For example, naming Vivec's parents as Berazik and Erdri. The original post describes Sermon 0 as, quote, a strange and offensive document about Vivec, provided by the Khajiit Treba Joe Basha, and that Goodall wrote it as a joke for Michael Kirkbride. It contains several secret messages hidden within. For example, if you take the last letter of each sentence in reverse order, it will read, Vivec committed no crime, a nod to the coded message in the original 36 lessons, which in fact claims the exact opposite. 448. Ebony Listening Frame. So way earlier in the Iceberg, we talked about Vivec's spear, Muatra, and how that was symbolic of his male anatomy. But remember, Vivec has both male and female forms. In Sermon 9 of the 36 lessons, Vivec defeats Ysmir Wolfhearth by clamping his ebony listening frame around the Nord's head, causing Ysmir's shouts to echo back into his ears and driving him mad. In a Reddit thread, Michael Kirkbride confirmed that the listening frame was a euphemism for Vivec's female sexual organs. So in effect, Vivec sent Wolfhearth insane by sitting on his face. Ironic, considering that Wolfhearth was supposed to be one of the most skilled tongues in all of history. 449. Hist Jillian Wars. We talked about this back in entry 303, but I'll recap it here briefly. The Jills are female aspects of Akatosh who help to repair dragon breaks and time wounds. The Michael Kirkbride text Kinmoon describes a war in the far future between the Jills and the Hist trees, with the Hist using armadas of root ships equipped with 16-dimensional mathematical artillery. This war is never mentioned elsewhere, and we don't really know the context behind it. But symbolically, the Hist and the Jills represent two different views of time. The Jills embody a strict, linear view of time, whereas the Hist are often described as timeless. So perhaps the victor of this conflict will ultimately determine the nature of time in the Aurbis. 450. Cold Harbour, Clockwork Tamriel. Sotha designed the Clockwork City to be a version of Nirn in miniature. His goal was to replicate the world, and in the process, perfect its flaws. But perhaps he's not the only one to have attempted this. If you look at the depiction of Cold Harbour in ESO, it appears as a dark, twisted mirror of Tamriel. Like Sotha Molag Bal may have been attempting to mimic Nirn to create his own perfect world. But instead of creating a paradise, the Prince of Domination's twisted mind is only capable of creating a hellscape, a prison of eternal suffering. 451. The Crimson Ship. The Khanatan flu was perhaps the deadliest plague in Tamriel's history. None were more stricken than the Cathringi, the Nedic human tribes of Blackmarsh. As the plague tore through their communities, one group of Cathringi attempted a desperate escape. They boarded a ship and spent a year at sea, but every port turned them away in fear. After being refused passage into Hammerfell, the ship sailed away into the open ocean, never to be seen again. But rumours of the ship still abound, and it is said to be floating out there somewhere in the sea, and that any who stumble upon it are doomed to die. In Hammerfell, the day it appeared offshore is still remembered as the Day of Shame. On this day, nobody leaves their home, for it is foretold that the ship will return, and take revenge on those who rejected them. 452. Storming of the Citadel. The storming of the Citadel refers to the last stand of the Aelids during the First Era, when the White Gold Tower fell to Alessia's armies. The Song of Pelennor claims that as Alessia's legions laid siege to the city, Pelennor Whitestrake cut his way to the White Gold Tower, slaying the Aelid king Umaril the Unfeathered before he was cut down by the surviving elven kings, who hacked him into 8 pieces. Then, the man-bull Murrahouse smashed his way into the chamber, and found the severed head of Pelennor, still clinging to life. Pelennor spoke again for the last time, warning Murrahouse that Umaril had not been utterly defeated, and would one day return to take his revenge. 453. Altmeri Form Wars. This is a reference to an out-of-game text by Michael Kirkbride, entitled, "How Beautiful You Are, That You Do Not Join Us." It references a long-ago event known as the Form Wars, when the Mer took the form of dregs and went to war against the Coral Kingdom of Thras. We don't know much else about this event, but it's likely that it was part of the Wars of the Dawn era, also known as the War of Manifest Metaphors, or the Elnathay Wars. During this time, the world and its inhabitants had not yet finalized their forms, so the description of Form Wars is apt, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility to imagine elves shape-shifting into dregs to better fight at sea. 454. Yagrum Bagan made Numidium. If you've made it this far, you probably know that Yagrum Bagan is the last living member of the Dwemer race. He claims to have been a master crafter in the service of Lord Kagrenak, which meant he was probably involved in the Numidium project. But just how involved was he? Well, perhaps he, not Kagrenak, was the Numidium's creator. This possibility is hinted at in Michael Kirkbride's Coda, which depicts an antagonistic Yagrum attempting to rebuild Numidium. If we theorize that the Numidium was responsible for the Dwemer's disappearance, it could be possible that Yagrum was spared because he originally created it. Ultimately, we'll probably never know for sure, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we haven't heard the last of Yagrum Bagan. 455. Sons of Horror. Alright, this is another really obscure one, so I'll do my best. It seems the Sons of Horror are only referred to in the out-of-game text New Hatter of the Sphinx Moth Inquiry Tree. When discussing the apotheosis of Talos, New Hatter writes, "Mantling and incarnation are separate roads. Do not mistake this. The latter is built from the cobbles of drawn bone destiny. The former, walk like them until they must walk like you. This is the death children bring as the Sons of Horror." So the first part seems to be saying that mantling a god is essentially acting like them until you become them, and that incarnation is achieved by bringing together several souls, the cobbles of drawn bone destiny. But the Sons of Horror bit has me stumped. My best guess is that it could be something to do with Hermaeus Mora. His name is sometimes contracted to Herma Mora, and if we take that one step further, it could just become Horror. And if anyone is hiding secrets about mantling and achieving godhood, it's likely to be the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. If anyone has a better guess, feel free to let me know down below, but for now, I'm going to move on before my brain explodes. 456. Kaleidocules. Way back when, we talked about chaotic creatia, which are essentially the subatomic particles of the Elder Scrolls universe. In a 2006 forum post, Michael Kirkbride expanded on this idea somewhat, describing a form of leaky creation known as kaleidocules, which the Daedra used to build things on their planes of Oblivion. I guess it's a contraction of the words kaleidoscope and molecules, though I'm not exactly sure where the kaleidoscope part fits in. To be honest, it's probably best not to read too much into a throwaway forum post from nearly 20 years ago, though at this point, this has become half the running time of these videos anyway. 457. Aelids were bird people. When the explorer Topal the Pilot first arrived in Cyrodiil, he encountered a strange race of bird-like humanoids living on what would become City Isle. This is recounted in the epic poem Father of the Niben. Topal the Pilot was enchanted with the islands and the feathered men who lived there. There, the Niben stayed for a moon, and the birdmen learned how to speak their own words, and with taloned feet to write. In joy for their new knowledge, they made Topal their lord, giving him their islands for the gift. After this, the birdfolk disappear from the pages of history. The Aldmer would settle Cyrodiil, becoming the ancestors of the Aeliad elves. It's often assumed that the birdfolk were wiped out by the Aeliads. But what if they were one and the same? Perhaps the birdfolk gradually evolved into the Aeliads, or intermingled with the Aldmer to create a new hybrid culture. Either way, birds and feathers would go on to become recurring motifs in Aeliad culture, implying some kind of avian connection. 458. Dragon tusks. In the Elder Scrolls, dragons are usually depicted as having horns, but a few also have tusks. This theory proposes that dragon hierarchy is based on these tusks, and that dragons with tusks outrank those with ordinary horns. Examples include Parthenax, the greatest of all dragons except for Alduin, and Calgrontide, a dragon from ESO who leads an entire brood, and is the only one shown with tusks. Tusked dragon priests such as Marak and Konaric also seem to be more powerful than those without tusks. Interestingly, the ancient Nords seem to have believed in an aspect of the time god known as the Akatusk, so the tusks of the dragons and their priests may be intended to show devotion to the father of all dragons. 459. Lorkhan's Heart, the Egg of Time. The Egg of Time is an ancient Dwemer tome that appears in Morrowind. It contains diagrams of a Dwemer, Kagrenax tools, and the heart of Lorcan, and its text is supposedly a refutation of a popular theory among the Dwemer that the use of Lorcan's heart involved unjustifiable risks. It seems fairly clear that the Egg of Time referred to in the title is the heart of Lorcan, but why would the Dwemer call it by this name? Well, we've already discussed the notion that Akatosh and Lorcan could be two halves of the same god. If this were true, it wouldn't just mean that Lorcan's heart was the heart of the world. It might also be the source of time itself. 460. Khajiit lactate genetic memory. You know, it's entries like this that make me regret learning to read. Anyway, this theory is based on a line from the book Azir Tragigeri. Azir Tragigeri? God knows how it's pronounced, but it's here if you want to try for yourself. The line in question is, the Imperials feel that everything must be written down for posterity, but every Khajiiti kitten born in elsewhere knows his history. He drinks it in with his mother's milk. Now this is probably just metaphorical, but this is the Elder Scrolls we're talking about. And it's the Khajiit, who have no shortage of weird lore. In the real world, breast milk is used to pass down antibodies, so it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that the Khajiit might pass on genetic memories in a similar way. Or perhaps that should be genetic memories. 461. The Prisoner. In every mainline Elder Scrolls game, the player begins as a nameless prisoner. But the prisoner is more than just a narrative device. It is the metaphysical counterpart of the player character in the game world. Sothersil calls the prisoner one who is unbound by fate, someone who exists outside the laws of determinism that govern the rest of creation. The prisoner is the embodiment of the idea of maybe that lies at the heart of the Aurbis, an individual of pure possibility. They are unchained from the constraints of the dream, able to choose their own path. In a universe ruled by gods and destiny, the prisoner represents the one power greater than any other: free will. 462. The 82nd Crodo. Andel Crodo is a name that appears in the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire. An Altmer Thalmor official from the Second Aldmeri Dominion, credited with pushing a policy of non-intervention outside Dominion borders. Some of the Thalmor opposed him, claiming such passivity would doom the Elder races, hinting at long-running ideological fractures within the Dominion. The name Andal Crodo is actually a tribute to the founder of the Essential Site, one of the earliest major Elder Scrolls lore hubs, which later merged into the Imperial Library. The 82nd Crodo, or 82 Crodo, is a username that pops up in early developer roleplays, notably Redguard Forum Madness, and may be either a pseudonym or an in-joke referencing this obscure figure from the lore. 463. City of Rock Creek. This is referring to an obscure Black Marsh settlement from Arena, which first appeared under the name Rock Park. It was notable for having its palace gate blocked off by an equipment shop, which was later referenced in-universe by the Daggerfall book Aios, Animal God, which misnames the town as Rock Creek. Apparently, the town was once ruled by Lord Proofrock and known for its raspberries and swamp weeds, until the town suffered a bizarre chain of catastrophes: crop failure, plague, and then a witch's curse that caused everyone to abandon it. The city has never been referenced again in the modern games, and is generally considered to be one of those early lore artifacts, one that's presumably been abandoned as Black Marsh's depiction became more alien in subsequent titles. 464. Atmora Aldmeris Inversion. Traditionally, men are considered Padamaic, representing chaos and change, while Mer are Anuic, embodying order and stasis. We can see this, for example, in how elves live long lives, while the lives of men are fleeting by comparison. However, the fate of their homelands suggests that the exact opposite may be true. Atmora, the ancestral land of men, is locked in a state of stasis, literally and metaphorically frozen. Aldmeris, on the other hand, is said to be lost, perhaps because its nature is ever-changing. It exists now only as a shifting memory, a Padamaic realm of constant chaos that can't be pinned to a map. If men actually embody stasis and elves change, it would flip the central conflict of Tamrielic history on its head. Still, the fate of their respective homelands could just be a coincidence, albeit one that is grimly ironic. 465. 1008 Weapons of Rapture. This entry refers to Et Arda, Et Adra, Eat the Dreamer, a cryptic letter supposedly penned by a moth priest as he undergoes zero sum, slowly evaporating from existence. His final act is to compose a piece of sheet music so powerful that it annihilates anyone who attempts to play or even hear it. The music itself was then sealed away in the 1008 Weapons of Rapture, metaphysical instruments said to embody pure, lethal revelation. Whether these bodies are physical tools or just concepts is unknown, but their very existence implies that, for the unprepared mind, enlightenment can quickly turn to destruction. 466. Thalmor UFOs. This one refers to the cancelled Tatterdemalion mod for Skyrim, which was largely based on concepts from the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 2nd edition. In it, the Thalmor had constructed a space station in orbit above Nirn, using metaphysical technology to interfere in the Dragonborn's destiny. They travelled in UFO-like ethereal ships to abduct mortals for experimentation, all in pursuit of reclaiming the heart of Lorcan. While entirely non-canon, the idea expands upon some canonical ideas, like the Sunbirds of Alinor and the Thalmor's obsession with undoing creation, and it's one vision of what might happen if Altmeri magic is taken to its logical extremes. And so we reach the end of another Iceberg entry, and I'm starting to question what it all means. Why are we here? What am I doing with my life? I was once a person with dreams and ambitions, and now my head is just filled with random Elder Scrolls facts and obscure forum posts from decades ago. I'm only half joking. I literally dreamed about being in Cyrodiil recently. So I better go and touch some grass, in case I finally snap and end up locked up like Pelagius Septim. I'll be back with the grand finale in a few weeks, and if you don't hear from me, just assume my mind has been imprisoned in the Shivering Isles for all eternity. Anyway, that's all for today. And until next time, take care.